Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. In this video, we will be talking about the throws keyword which is used in exception handling in Java. So as of now, we have talked about several aspects related to exception handling, and we also talked about the differences between errors and exceptions as well as checked and unchecked exceptions. Then we talked about the various ways in which exception can be handled in Java, and we talked about 5 different ways. So we also saw try and catch block, as well as we also saw the different combinations of try, catch and finally blocks. And in my last video, we talked about the throw statement or the throw keyword, which is used for generating any programmer defined exception object, right? So in today's video, we will be talking about the final keyword which is used in order to handle exception or in exception handling. So today we will talk about the throws keyword. So whenever we are using this throws keyword, we have to essentially understand that this keyword is specifically used to declare an exception. Declare an exception, like in throw keyword that we used in our that we talked about in our previous video. This particular keyword is not used within a, or it is not used as a statement, but it is used only as a keyword, and it gives information to the caller method that there might be some exception which is occurring. So it is better for that particular method to provide the exception handling code so that the normal flow can be maintained. So basically, the second point that we have to remember is that it gives information to the caller method about some probable exceptions, which about an exception which would occur exception which might occur and also uh, gives a heads up, or it gives a direction for the caller method, and also provide the caller method the way or indication to handle the exception. That means, suppose if I'm having a method, okay, suppose if I'm having a method, so this method might throw some exception, and if some other method is trying to call this particular method, the purpose of the throws keyword would be to make this particular method realize, or indicate this particular method that whatever method it is trying to access or it is trying to work with, that is basically that might be throwing any exception, and that this particular method, so I'll write it as 1 and 2. So method 2 has to handle the exceptions which are occurring in method 1. Okay, so it just gives an indication that an exception might occur in the method, and that method, if it is called by any other method, the calling method or the caller method has to handle that particular exception. Now suppose if I'm using a file program, okay, so let us say I want to read a particular file. So let me first declare a class. Let's say I am using it as file operation. This particular class, what does it do? It has a method within it which says that void read file. So within this method, what happens, I am trying to define the file input stream object. So file input stream is basically used in order to read the files. So we will talk about this file input stream in details when we will be doing our file sessions, file handling with Java. So file input stream f is equal to new file input stream, and here I am trying to define the location from which this particular or a file needs to be accessed. So let's say I want to access it from C drive, not C drive, let's say E drive. Okay, E drive, and it is test.txt. So under this, and I have also some other statements written after this particular statement. So let me write it as other statements here, and I will close this particular class. Now when I'm using this file input stream class, and yes, when we are using this file input stream, I also have to import this particular class. So import file input stream. Now whenever I'm using this file input stream class, this will throw an exception. This might throw an exception which is known as file not found. Okay, so exception like file not found might be there. Okay, file not found exception might be there if the file is not present in the E drive, and this is basically a compile time exception or a checked exception, and we have to handle this exception, for which we definitely have to use the try catch block. Now when we are using a throws keyword, okay, so whenever I'm using a throws keyword, essentially I have to understand that the throws keyword is just giving me a way to declare that exception. It will just give the information to the caller method that there may be an exception, so it is better for the caller method to provide the exception handling code so that it is not terminated abnormally. Okay, now what happens is whenever I'm using this throws keyword, I have to use it along with the method declaration. So what happens, how I'm supposed to use it, I have to use it using this way. So void read file, I will use the throws keyword, and then what type of exception it might throw. So file not found exception is one exception which this particular program or this particular class might block of code might throw. So in that case what happens is that I have to just understand that I am just indicated that it is throwing me this, it might throw me this kind of error. Or let's say I want to write a file. Okay, suppose I want to write a file, so within the same program, let me just mark this as star so that we understand from where this program would continue. So from here, so let us say if I want to write a file, so void write file. Okay, so if I want to write a file here also, let's say I have to use the file output stream class, and similarly I have to import this file output stream, and here I'm using, let's say, fo is equal to new file output stream, and suppose I have to write it in my E drive, which is, let's say, abc.txt. Okay, so here also similar situation might arise where I might have to where the file that I'm supposed to write is not present in that particular location. Under this situation also, I will have a file not found exception. This might arise if this particular location does not have this particular file. Okay, for this also we have to use the throws keyword. So throws, what type of exception will it be there? The file not found exception would be there. Okay, so when I'm using this, again I have to understand that in this way the file in this way we are basically not being able to handle the exception. Okay, we are simply throwing the exception, or we are simply indicating the caller method that this particular method might throw a file not found exception. Now suppose now I have another class. Okay, so here again I will not end this program, it will continue. So suppose I have another program which is, let's say, class file in class file input out. Okay, let me first write it down properly. Okay, file input out. So when I am doing this, within this let me have the main method, which is public static void main, and then let's say string arguments. Okay, and here what I'm trying to do is I am trying to call the method which I have already defined here. Okay, one is the read file and the other one is the write file. So now if I'm trying to call this file, essentially I have to create an object of this particular class, which is file operation class. Okay, so I will create an object which is file operation. Let's say I'm having the object as FOP is equal to new file operation, and here what I'm trying to do is I will simply call this method using the object. Okay, so read file was the method which I defined in that particular class, which is the file operation class, and I will simply close this. So whenever I am trying to do this, this is basically the calling method. Okay, so this is basically the calling method, which will be calling the method as read file or write file that we have already declared. Okay, and here we have already declared that it might throw a file not found exception. So now this particular method, this main method, now knows that the method which we are using as, or which we are trying to call, it basically has, it might throw an exception. So we need to handle this exception. Always remember that using the throw or throws keyword, we cannot handle the exception. Okay, throws basically it will just declare that, or it will give information that there might be a error, which there might be an exception which might be thrown from that particular, or which might be existing in that particular method. Now it is depending on the calling method in order to handle that particular exception. Now if I do not handle this exception, okay, what will happen? So if I do not handle this exception, this will give me a compile time error. Okay, saying that we will have saying that there might be an exception which might be present in the program, and that exception is not handled. Okay, so this might give me an error. Now how do I handle this exception? Handling exception is very simple. It follows the traditional approach where I will be using the try and catch block. So here I will be using try and followed by the catch block. So catch, here I have the file not found exception, found exception, followed by the reference variable which is e, and let us simply print that e dot print stack trace, right? So when we are trying, when we write these two blocks, immediately the exception which was thrown from these two methods, file not found exception, similarly here also file not found exception, this is immediately handled in the calling method or the caller method. So we have already checked that we use the throws keyword in order to give information to this method that there will be an exception, or there might be an exception which might be arising in those methods that we have already declared, okay, undefined, and that those exception needs to be handled. Now throws keyword is used to declare only for checked exceptions, okay. So for unchecked exceptions, like let's say if there is a null pointer exception, unchecked is the runtime exception basically. So if there is such kind of exception, it is basically depending upon the programmer's fault, okay, or it is basically some logical errors which might be there in the program and which might be corrected by the programmer, and that is not, if such kind of errors exist or such kind of exceptions, like let us consider as the null pointer exception. So if those kind of exception it occurs, then it is the programmer's drawback, right? It is the programmer's fault that he has not performed checkup before the code being used. So like in my previous videos we have discussed about the arithmetic exception, right? So when we are considering divide by zero, which is an arithmetic exception, that is also the programmer's error. It is not from the existing exception which might be occurring. So, or we do not have any check on it, that means the program will compile fine, but only during the runtime it will be throwing us an error. So here also we have to identify that those kind of errors or those kind of exceptions are not handled, or those kind of exceptions are not addressed using the throws keyword. Throws will be used only to declare for checked exception, right? So this point I think we can mention it here. So here we will be using only for checked exceptions. So checked, by now we have already understood. If not, you can always go back to the previous videos which we have discussed regarding checked and unchecked exceptions. So checked exceptions basically is are those exceptions which will be throwing us a compile time error, or we will not be able to compile the program itself because we will get a check, or we will be getting a error message right during the compilation stage stating that either it might have an it might be throwing us an exception, so we need to handle it immediately, or we need to address that particular exception, right? So we already talked about this. So it is used only for unchecked, or it is throws is used on declared only for checked type of exceptions. Now this is the primary syntax. This particular um, representation is the primary syntax of the throws keyword, where we have the method followed by the throws keyword, and then we have the class exception, class of exception which that particular method might be throwing, or where what that class of exception which might be encountered in that particular method. So this is the primary syntax, and we always have to understand that this throws keyword always works along with a method in its declaration part only, not within the method. So when we did throw keyword, so throw was used within a method, but here it is in case of throws keyword, throws is used in the method declaration itself. Now we will be discussing about one important aspect, that is the between difference between throw and throws. So when we are talking about the difference between throw and throws, we have already done throw, and we have already discussed about the throws also. Now it should be clear to us that throw keyword is used to create an exception object manually. That means the normal method creates an exception object as exception occurs in that method, but when we use throw, programmer is responsible to create that exception object. So if we are using throw, we simply have to understand that the programmer would be creating the exception object manually. Okay, exception object. However, the parameters or the components of the exception object remain same, but in normally when we are encountering any exception or we have any exception, that particular method under which the exception has occurred, that is responsible for creating the exception object. But here the programmer is responsible for creating the exception object, which is actually passed on to the um, JVM. Okay, so like in my previous video we talked about the throw keyword, okay, and how that throw keyword is used as a statement in a particular program. So you can always go back and have a look at it. Throw is generally used for customized type of exceptions, where we will be customizing exception class and using that exception customized exception in order to work with our main logic of the program. However, when we are considering throws, so whenever we are considering throws, it just gives us an information about the exception, information about the exception or declaration about the exception, and it will indicate the caller method that the given exception can occur. So we have to handle it either using the try catch block or again declare it by using throws keyword. Now it is not that we simply have to handle whenever we are using throws keyword. So we said that we can handle it using the try catch block. It is not always necessary that we use try catch block in order to handle it. We can also use throws here, okay, in the main method also. So throws, let's say if I'm using file not found exception here, then also this particular exception would be addressed or this information would be passed on. However, it is not recommended that we use throws keyword with the main method, because if we are throwing any exception from the main method, essentially this will be passed on to the JVM, and JVM, what it will do, it will be passing this to the default exception handler, and which will terminate the program abnormally and simply print the exception object. Okay, but we have to understand that whenever we are using this throws keyword, we do not have to use try and catch block within that particular method. Like in this particular example, so we have used throws keyword with this particular method, so we have not used the try and catch block here. Okay, we are using it in the caller method. That means the calling method has to take care of the exception handling part. In this case, the calling method was main, and here what I have done, I have used throws keyword again with the main method. So whenever I'm using throws keyword with the main method, that means I'm not using this try and catch block here, and I'm simply passing the information to the JVM from the main method that there is an exception which is file not found exception, and it is not being handled. So what JVM will do, it will simply pass this information to the default exception handler, which will then print that particular exception object and terminate the program abnormally. But it is not our motive that the program needs to be terminated in an abnormal way. It should be executed in a proper manner. Okay, so the first and the primary difference between throw and throws keyword is this, which is throw is basically used by the throw is used by the programmer in order to create the exception object manually, and it is used for customized exceptions. However, throws keyword is used to declare information about the exception or declare the exception to the calling method. Okay, to the calling or caller method, and the exception is handled here. Okay, exception is handled in the caller method. The second important difference which we have among throw and throws keyword is that throw keyword is mainly used for runtime exceptions. Okay, throw is mainly used for runtime exceptions or unchecked exceptions or unchecked exceptions. However, throws keyword is mainly used for compile time exception. So in case of throw, our program might get compiled. However, in case of throws keyword, we will not get a proper compilation because it will throw us an error or throw us an exception if it is not being handled. Okay, so it will give a compilation. It is used in the compilation time, and it will give a compile time exception. It works with compile time exceptions or let's say checked exceptions or checked exceptions, right? So this is the second important difference between the throw and the throws keyword. Likewise, the third important difference we have to remember is that in case of throw keyword, we can allow only single exception. So throw has just a single exception. So when we are using throw keyword, we generally, what do we generally use it with the customized exceptions. So whenever we are using it, how do we use it? We use it like throw, then new, let's say voting exception. So this is the syntax. So voting exception, and we pass on the error message, right? So when we are doing this, we have to understand that we can use just one exception when we are using the throw keyword. However, if I am using the throws keyword, we can have multiple exception classes declared. Okay, multiple exceptions can be declared using simply comma. Like suppose here I have used file not found exception, right? If I use comma, let's say I use comma here, and then I can use another class of exception, let's say arithmetic exception, or let's say null pointer exception, or let's say any compile time exceptions like class not found exceptions or IO exception or SQL exception. So we can go on using comma and using multiple different exceptions. However, whenever we are considering the throw statement or the throw keyword, we can use just single exception here. So this is the third important difference between the throw and the throws keyword. Now the fourth important difference between both of them is that throw is used within a method. So throw, it is used within a method. However, throws, again, it is used within the method signature. That is whenever we declare the method, okay, within the method signature. So if you look into this, so whenever we are using this particular statement, how do we do it? We use it within a method. Suppose this method, this particular throw, we used it inside the main method. However, whenever we are using throws is with the method signature itself. So this is the method signature. So method signature itself has the throws keyword. So this is the fourth important point that we discussed related to throw and throws. Now again, in the fifth difference is, in case of throw, it is always related with a or followed by a new instance. Followed by a new instance. This is because we use a new keyword here. So this new keyword, this is basically used here. So it will create a new instance, that is the object throws but throws keyword is followed by a class. Okay, so whenever we are using this throw keyword, we always have a class of exception. Okay, so it is always followed by the new instance. However, throws in case of throws we do not have any such provision. So throws will not be followed by any new instance or any new class, right? In the next important point that we will be discussing about the throw and throws is that we cannot write any statement after the throw keyword. Thus it can be used to break the statement, but there is no such rule for throws keyword. So if we are trying to use throw, we cannot write any statement after throw. However, if we are using the throws keyword, we do not have no such problem or no such, let's say, property, because it exists with the message signature. So we do not have any such properties where we cannot write any statement after the throw statement. We also discussed in my previous video why we cannot write any statement after the throw statement has been written. So let me again overall recapitulate what we have already discussed. Throw keyword is used to create an exception object manually by the programmer. So that is otherwise the by default method is responsible to create the exception object. Okay, however in throws keyword it is used to declare the exception. That means it will just give information about the exception and indicate the caller method that the given type of exception can occur, and you have to handle it while calling. Now the second one is throw is basically used for runtime exceptions or unchecked exceptions. On the other hand, throws is used for compile time exceptions or checked exceptions. Again, when I'm talking about throw keyword, it can allow only single exception. However, throws allows multiple exceptions. That is, let's say if we have file not found exception, comma null pointer exception, comma arithmetic exception, comma IO exception, we can go on adding the number of exceptions right after the throws keyword. The fourth important point that we discussed is throws keyword is used with method signature uh, wherever possible, and throw is used within a method. Okay, the fifth important point is that throw is always followed by a new instance, and that new keyword is always followed by the class of the exception which we have just created. On the other hand, throws do not have any such provision. Throws keyword is basically followed by class. In this, and the sixth and the final important point that we need to understand is that we cannot write any statement after throw keyword, and thus it could be used to break the statement. However, throws keyword does not have any such rules. Okay, so this is all about exception handling and what are the different ways in which we can handle the exceptions. So we discussed five different types, five different ways. So one is the try, then we talked about try and catch, block, and then try, catch, and finally, as well as we also discussed about the throw and the throws keyword and the difference between throw and throws keyword. So in the next video we will be talking about how do we create a customized exception class. So that is all for this video. Thank you.